Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are attempting a high-speed structural analysis of the global system. We're trying to rip the mask off the headlines for the final week of November 2025, which is week 48.
That's right.
And for that, we're diving into the MGF Weekly Log, which is, I guess, a kind of specialized diagnostic report.
It is. Instead of just summarizing what happened, this framework looks at the underlying structure and gradient. So
Yeah.
the tension, the friction, the actual pressure that's driving global change.
Right. So our goal here is pretty simple. We want to stop reading the news like it's a story.
And start reading it like an engineering report.
Exactly. An engineering report on this huge interconnected system of global membranes.
And that's the only way to do it, really. We have to move beyond the surface narratives, the impressionistic judgments. The log doesn't care if an event was good or bad. Not at all. It only cares about the forces being applied and the stress that results.
So to do that, to gauge the health of this global membrane, we have to start with the core metric.
We do. We call it VST. Velocity, stability, and transparency.
VST.
And this metric is basically our shortcut. It's how we map where all that stress is building up around the world.
Okay, let's get the diagnosis then right away. What was the VST reading for week 48? Give us the structural assessment up front.
The reading was very specific, and I think structurally pretty significant it was. High velocity, mid-stability, mid-high transparency.
Okay.
And, crucially, this is categorized as an asymmetrical type.
Let's unpack that asymmetry. High velocity. That makes sense. It's the end of the year. Systems are accelerating. We're talking about AI development, high-stakes diplomacy, financial policy shifts. Things are moving fast.
Very fast.
But if things are moving so fast and stability is only, middling, why is transparency rated mid-high? That feels wrong.
It does feel counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Yeah, when things move fast, they usually get harder to see, more opaque.
And that is the absolute essence of the asymmetry. It describes this unique challenge we're facing right now, which the log calls twofold transparency.
Twofold transparency.
See, we are drowning in data. We have so much information. Transparency is high if you're an expert looking at the raw metrics. So things like detailed semiconductor fab capacity reports, they're crystal clear. Central bank signaling, it's explicit. Military logistics data, you can measure it. The expert data is transparent.
But there's always a but.
But the decisive points, the critical intentions, the hidden political deals, the systemic consequences, the real societal impact, all of that remains deeply obscured. It's unreadable.
So you have the map, but the compass is broken.
That's a great way to put it. You have a perfect map. That's the high data transparency. But the compass readings are just wildly unreliable. That's low strategic transparency. We have tons of information, but the interpretation difficulty is high. We know the code, but we have no idea what the programmer was thinking.
So that mid-high transparency reading means it was a week where analysis is actually harder because the sheer volume of data hides the few things that really matter.
Exactly. The noise is hiding the signal.
Before we jump into the events of the week, we have to talk about the framework itself. The operating system the MGF log uses to, process reality.
Yeah.
Because if we don't get the rules of the game, then terms like VST, Shear, and Calcification are just going to sound like impenetrable jargon.
That's the critical first step. It really requires a bit of intellectual discipline.
So what's the first principle?
The first principle is core field A, structure over impression. So when you see a news story, we want you to train yourself to ignore the superficial stuff.
Like what?
Like whether the politician sounds sincere or if the headline makes you angry. We look past the judgment of whether the story is true or false in the conventional sense.
So if we just strip away all that noise, that impression, what's actually left?
You're left with the structure, the actual architecture of the event. And we focus on three things there.
Okay.
First, causality. What are the actual inputs and outputs? Second, objective functions.
What the actor is trying to achieve.
Right. What is the goal they're trying to maximize? Is it stability, profit, territorial control, maybe public approval? Every action has an objective function, whether it's conscious or not.
And the third.
And third, gradients. So in which direction is the pressure being applied? The structure is the architecture of these three things, and we focus on extracting that architecture because the code always determines the output, no matter what the user interface looks like.
That structural view, it makes perfect sense for things like finance or engineering, but global events are driven by people, and people are emotional.
What's going on?
Fear, anger, hope. These aren't objective functions, but they absolutely drive major geopolitical actions. How do you fit something so subjective, like emotion, into a cold structural framework?
That brings us to our second principle, core field B, emotion, as gradient.
Okay.
We treat human emotion, anger, anxiety, optimism, not as noise we need to filter out, but as a really sophisticated sensor.
Sensor.
The emotional intensity is read as the strength of the gradient. If a lot of people feel acute fear about a specific topic, that fear is indicating high pressure at that exact point in the system.
That's fascinating. But let me push back on that a little.
Please.
If we accept emotion as a valid sensor, doesn't that risk validating every intense reaction? You could have a highly biased analyst or even a fringe group showing extreme anger or fear about something that's totally fictional.
A very important distinction.
So if we treat that bias as a heat source, are we just amplifying noise?
We're not saying the content of the emotion is true. We're saying the intensity is a measurement of localized system tension. If an analyst's bias is strong, if they're really activated, using crisis words, showing personal dissonance, we use that as what we call an observer firing model sensor, an OFM
So
sensor.
you're not dismissing their bias.
No, we're triangulating it. It tells us that this specific analyst's internal OS has just brushed up against a membrane where tension is structurally acute. Whether their interpretation is right or wrong doesn't matter. It just confirms there's localized heat, which means high pressure.
Okay, so the bias itself is a measurable heat source. That clarifies it. Now let's get to the 3 layers of reality. These are foundational for understanding friction, right? The N, I, and OS layers.
Yes, the 3 layers of reality are how we break down any event. Let's use a simple analogy, not a computer, maybe a major diplomatic conference.
Perfect.
So the N layer, or narrative, is the simplest. It's the press conference, the signed document, the smiling photos, the slogans.
Peace in our time.
Peace in our time, accelerating cooperation, exactly. It is the official story, the language used to package reality for everyone else.
Then we have the layer just beneath that surface, the I layer.
The I layer, or internal intention value, this is the driver. At this conference, the I layer is the historical trauma each nation is carrying, the deep-seated ideology, self-determination, manifest destiny, market supremacy.
The real reasons they're in the room.
The core fears about resource scarcity and the true unstated strategic intentions. This layer sets the ultimate boundaries of what's even negotiable.
And finally, the engine itself, the OS layer.
The OS layer, or operational system, is the actual machinery that executes the action. It's not the slogan from the N layer or the ideology from the I layer. It's the specific bureaucratic protocol, the supply chain logistics, the deployed algorithms, the market regulations, the military chains of command. The OS layer is where decisions are functionally made and carried out.
So in our conference analogy,
the OS layer is the precise legal text, the established military doctrines, and the financial transfer mechanisms that will be activated long after the press conference ends.
and the friction, the real trouble that comes from the mismatched speed of these layers. We have OS speed, N speed, and R speed.
That's it. OS speed is how quickly institutions can execute a decision or how fast algorithms trade. N speed is how fast public opinion or media narratives can shift, which is basically instantaneous today.
And the most important one.
The crucial one is R speed, or reality constraints. This is the speed of hard physical reality, the time it takes to mine lithium, or build a new electrical substation, or train a specialized workforce, or move heavy armor across a continent.
It's slow.
Our speed is usually linear, slow, and constrained by physics and regulation. You can't just wish it to go faster.
And when those different speeds collide, we get shear.
Exactly. Shear is the friction, the trouble, the structural stress that's generated by the speed difference between any 2 of those layers.
Give me a simple example.
Yeah, imagine a politician. That's the N layer promises that next month, every single household will have a new, cheaper, high-speed AI chip.
A classic N layer promise.
Right. But the R speed, the logistics needed to actually manufacture, ship, and install millions of those chips is constrained by supply chains and permits. That huge gap between the rapid narrative promise and the slow physical execution that generates shear. And that friction generates heat and instability.
And all of this tension, it concentrates at the membrane.
The membrane is just the boundary where that tension is concentrated. And for week 48, we identified 4 major global membranes where shear, calcification, and compatibility errors were peaking.
With the MGF framework loaded, let's jump right into the week's analysis. The log flagged 4 key structural tension points globally. Let's start with block 1, the Ukraine membrane, which you defined by peak shear.
Yes. This specific analysis was defined by a classic paradox. Peace narrative accelerates, battlefield stays hot.
Right.
This is probably the clearest example of shear we saw all week.
Help us dissect that paradox. The news suggests that these high-level peace negotiations are speeding up. Frameworks are being drawn up, driven heavily by Western diplomatic initiatives.
That's the narrative, yes.
Yet, reports on the ground confirm the physical R-speed reality is still intense. High attrition rates, local events is continuing. Why this maximal disconnect?
It's because the narrative layer, this idea of an end-of-war roadmap, the end speed, is being pushed by international actors at a speed that dramatically exceeds the speed of the reality constraints on the ground.
The R-speed.
And it also exceeds the speed of internal political alignment, the OS speed within the countries fighting. This gap is the largest shear of the week.
So the diplomats are running a 100-meter dash.
While the soldiers on the ground are fighting a marathon, it's a fundamental mismatch.
And what's the structural conflict that ensures this shear keeps going? It comes down to a compatibility error between the core operational systems of the main actors, right?
Precisely. The log identifies a fundamental clash of their objective functions. The U.S.-led approach, which is focused on managing escalation, resource allocation, maintaining a unified front. It operates under what we'd call a negotiation territory optimization OS.
And optimization OS.
Yes. The objective is to maximize the best strategic outcome based on the current reality of power, resources, and exhaustion.
Yeah.
It's a pragmatic, almost transactional OS.
But Ukraine's driving OS is completely different.
Absolutely. Ukraine's fundamental operational system is the Sovereignty Inviolability OS. Its objective function is maximizing territorial integrity, restoring the 1991 borders, and maintaining national survival, regardless of the immediate logistical cost.
So you have one system trying to optimize based on pragmatism and the other trying to maximize based on an existential value.
And those two systems are structurally incompatible.
So even if the narratives sound good, we all want peace. The underlying code running the decision-making machines is pushing for totally different, non-overlapping goals, and that just maximizes the friction.
It does. The N layer is aggressively preempting the structural readiness. It's trying to fast-track this peace frame into 2026.
But the other layers aren't there yet.
But since the R speed, the battlefield, and the I layer, the core values, are lagging so far behind, the resulting peace framework is being built on a foundation of maximum shear. This process isn't resolving friction, it's just embedding future instability.
So the incompatibility remains, it's just being covered up by a fast-moving story.
You've got it.
Let's move to block 2, the Middle East membrane. The log used language that sounded, frankly, deeply alarming, silent thinning, and the most quiet danger in the last 5 years. When we look at Gaza, Lebanon, the Red Sea, the conflict is visibly hot. So what is structurally quiet about it?
That's where this crucial concept of calcification comes in. If the conflict were conventionally hot, we would expect to see high volatility in all the related membranes.
Like what? The oil market.
The global oil market should be spiking. There should be intense, widespread global public outcry leading to major diplomatic shifts. Insurance premiums for shipping should be soaring past critical thresholds.
But that's not really happening.
Correct. Calcification means that the layers that should be acting as pressure valves are failing to fire. They're staying silent and hardened. The conflict is running at a constant low-intensity fire. It's structurally eroding the region, that's the silent thinning, but the global system's protective mechanisms are muted.
The world is just used to it.
The public is fatigued. Markets are pricing in the conflict as a known constant instead of a shock. And diplomatic channels are just performing maintenance rather than engaging in real crisis resolution.
So calcification is the structural silence of the response, not the silence of the event itself. It's like a person having a heart attack, but their pain receptors are blocked, so they don't signal any distress.
That is a perfect analogy. Think of it like a boiler where the safety valve is rusted shut. It's calcified.
And the heat is still building inside.
The internal heat, the constant conflict, the axis of resistance reconfiguring, the humanitarian crisis, it's still building. But because the market, which is the pressure gauge, and the public, the steam vent, aren't reacting, the pressure is just trapped.
The stability is brittle.
Structurally brittle, yes. And that twofold transparency, it's at its peak here. We have high data on the bombing, but zero strategic clarity on intent or resolution.
So the danger isn't the current level of heat, it's the fact that the heat can't escape.
Precisely. Calcification maximizes the probability of a nonlinear rupture, a membrane tear. When that brittle, hardened membrane finally gives way, it won't be a gradual increase in intensity. It'll be a sudden, unexpected jump, a complete system failure at the point of greatest unreleased pressure.
Moving on to Block 3, Japan's monetary and inflation membrane. A total shift in gears to high finance, but the structural tension is still there. The log flagged major signals about the end of the zero-rate OS. How pivotal was week 48 for the financial system?
This was a week of high financial OS velocity. What that means is the mechanisms of decision-making in the financial world were speeding up significantly.
And what was the key moment?
The key moment was the Bank of Japan, through Governor Ueda, giving these explicit signals of doubt regarding their current policy. This is more than just market noise. This is the institutional OS signaling that the long-standing status quo is fundamentally changing.
For over a decade, the zero-rate OS has been a foundational pillar of global finance. Its end is a monumental structural change. What tension does this transition from the zero-rate OS to a normal OS immediately activate?
It activates a classic compatibility error right inside the domestic Japanese structure. You have two massive operational systems moving in completely opposite directions.
Sure.
The financial OS is moving toward tightening, normalization, higher rates. It's accelerating away from that 2020s anomaly.
And what's it colliding with?
It's colliding with the entrenched fiscal OS. This is the system, built up over decades of cheap money, that is designed to maximize spending, leverage, and debt expansion. It relies on those low rates to maintain political viability and public services.
So a tightening financial OS is on a collision course with an expansionary fiscal OS.
A direct collision.
That seems like a political nightmare just waiting to happen. How does this compatibility error show up in reality?
It shows up as constant, prolonged domestic friction. Every single financial policy adjustment, every rate discussion, every bond market move will be met with immense political resistance from the fiscal OS, which does not want to adjust its spending habits.
So the system is fighting itself.
The OS is fighting itself. The log suggests this policy OS twist, this internal fighting, will be the defining state of tension in Japan's financial architecture all the way through 2026 and 2027. It's structural misalignment generated by the necessary transition itself.
Finally, Block 4. The AI X semiconductor X energy membrane. This is the future tension. The log described the speed difference here as generating an automatic catastrophic gradient. That's dramatic language.
It is.
But considering the stakes, maybe it's justified. Explain this velocity mismatch.
The language is strong because the physics of this mismatch is just non-negotiable. We have two velocities. First, the AIOS velocity is extremely high, and frankly, it's exponential. We're seeing computational requirements for training models doubling frequently, massive investment flowing into infrastructure, and an exponential increase in application demand across every single sector. The code is running faster than ever.
But the infrastructure is constrained by our speed, by physical reality.
Exactly. The physical reality OS velocity, which covers energy generation, utility grid capacity, water for cooling, and critically regulatory permitting and physical construction, is fundamentally linear and slow.
Right.
It takes 5 to 10 years to build a major new electrical substation or a high-capacity power plant. It takes years to train the specialized labor force.
So the demand curve is basically going vertical, and the supply curve is running horizontally. The gap, the gradient, it just widens automatically, ensuring more and more friction.
It is mathematically guaranteed. That widening speed difference creates the automatic catastrophic gradient. Reports are now explicitly quantifying the AI power problem, showing that energy capacity, not chip scarcity, is becoming the primary structural constraint.
So energy is the new bottleneck.
The log flags this resource constraint friction as the primary surveillance target for 2025 through 2028. Because physics cannot indefinitely accommodate the speed of the code, the stability of this membrane is inherently mid to low, because our speed is a hard limit.
That's a pretty sobering structural reality check for the whole high-velocity AI hype cycle.
It is.
Okay, so we've broken down the 4 tension points. Now let's synthesize them back into the 4 gradient vectors that the log identified. This tells us the direction and the intensity of the pressure on the global system this week.
Yes, we can connect these blocks directly to the pressure they're generating.
Starting with Ukraine, the peak shear gave us gradient A.
Gradient A is the shear gradient. The key vector here is the peace narrative's OD, which is a preemptive initiation. Diplomacy is trying to force a structural change before the logistics, the political will, and the fundamental value, the I layer, are actually ready.
So it's pushing for a resolution that isn't really there.
The gradient is pushing for resolution, But the underlying tension source, the deal OS versus the sovereignty OS, remains unresolved. This means the pressure vector is directed toward embedding future conflict risk. It's a structural misalignment trying to mask itself as progress.
The silent danger in the Middle East gave us the most concerning signal, gradient B.
Gradient B is the fear calcification gradient. The structural phenomenon here is the silent hardening of the response mechanisms. The intensity of fear and pressure inside the conflict zone is not translating into external market volatility or diplomatic action.
It's unreleased thermal pressure.
Exactly. This gradient is pushing toward a localized high-intensity rupture because the natural escape valves are shut. We are watching a fear gradient that is structurally contained, which is far, far more dangerous than one that manifests openly.
Japan's domestic financial tension provided us with gradient C.
Gradient C is the compatibility gradient. This is the internal pressure vector generated by two core operational systems, the expansionary fiscal OS and the tightening financial OS colliding as Japan moves toward normalization.
And that just grinds everything to a halt.
This gradient ensures political and economic decision-making will be continually hampered by this structural incompatibility. It forces compromises that satisfy neither system fully. So the pressure vector is directed internally toward prolonged policy friction.
And the fundamental mismatch between tech and physics gives us the long-term warning, gradient D.
Gradient D is the time pressure gradient. The vector here is the exponential acceleration of the AI growth OS, running far, far ahead of the linear capacity of the physical resource OS. This gradient is forcing immediate, rapid political and infrastructure decisions just to maintain the status quo and prevent the capacity gap from widening even more. The pressure here is purely driven by time, or rather, the lack of it.
It's trying to force physical reality to break its own rules.
To accelerate beyond its structural capacity, yes.
Let's circle back for a moment to the observer firing model, the OFM. You mentioned that analysts' emotional intensity serves as a sensor. How does that help us confirm the structural risk, particularly for gradients B and D?
It adds a layer of validity triangulation. For example, when you look at commentary on the Middle East, gradient B, analysts might struggle to explain why the markets aren't reacting to geopolitical events that 5 years ago would have caused massive oil spikes.
They can't make it make sense.
Right. The analytical dissonance, the strong language expressing confusion or disbelief, is registered as high firing intensity. This confirms that the analyst's own OS has detected a high-tension membrane, the calcification, that is behaving abnormally.
They're essentially sensing the trapped heat that we talked about.
Exactly. And similarly for gradient D, the AI and energy problem, high firing intensity in specialized tech and energy reports confirms that the physical resource constraints are real, non-negotiable, and causing immense operational anxiety within the sectors that have to actually execute.
So the log uses that intensity from observers.
As confirmation. Confirmation that gradients B and D represent the most volatile structural points, regardless of how calm the end-layer narrative might seem on the surface.
This entire analysis, it really points to a system where the code, the OS, is consistently outpacing physical reality, and it's building up immense, sometimes hidden stress.
That's the core finding.
The log warns about the risk of a nonlinear rupture, a membrane tear. What set of indicators has to align to significantly raise the probability of this kind of unexpected collapse?
A membrane tear isn't just a big event, it's a structural collapse. It's where the system jumps non-linearly to a new, completely unexpected state. And the log identifies a specific three-element set that, when combined, creates a quasi-critical state. It significantly increases the risk of rupture.
Okay, let's review them as a synthesis of everything we've talked about this week. The first is what we saw everywhere, velocity mismatch.
Correct. Number 1, velocity mismatch. We saw this most clearly in the exponential AIOS versus the linear R-speed of infrastructure, but also in the fast diplomatic end layer versus the slow battlefield R-speed. Continuous extreme speed differences between layers stretch the membrane until it's threadbare.
The second element is the most insidious risk we identified this week, high calcification.
Number 2, high calcification. This is the Middle East problem. When the natural pressure release mechanisms, markets, public opinion, standard diplomatic procedure are hardened and suppressed, the thermal pressure gets trapped inside.
Which makes everything brittle.
It prevents the system from regulating itself slowly, making the membrane brittle and highly sensitive to external shocks. A small, unrelated event could trigger a massive reaction because the accumulated pressure has nowhere else to go.
And the final piece of the structural puzzle is the internal contradiction, compatibility error.
Number 3, compatibility error. This is the structural misalignment. It's Japan's fiscal OS colliding with its financial OS, or the fundamentally different objective functions in the Ukraine negotiation.
It's the system working against itself.
When the core systems that should be providing internal stability are fighting each other, the entire structure is weakened, which just accelerates the stress caused by the speed and the trapped heat.
So when a system is moving too fast, velocity mismatch trapping its internal heat-high calcification and structurally fighting its self-compatibility error, we have the perfect storm for a membrane tear.
That's the recipe.
That's why that mid to low stability rating is so important, even when financial markets seem calm.
Precisely. Stability is highly asymmetrical. While finance may show signs of structural organization, like Japan moving toward normalization, the security membranes are critically vulnerable due to trapped pressure and shear. The combination of high velocity and widespread, low-level shear means the global system is operating under persistent asymmetrical stress. The world is structurally less resilient than the headlines might suggest.
It sounds like the overall structural finding for week 48 is that the speed of the code, the operational layer, is now dangerously disconnected from the physical and emotional realities it's supposed to govern.
It is.
And that disconnection is generating enormous trapped friction.
That's right. The world is being forced to accelerate, but the cost of that acceleration is being paid in structural instability and brittleness.
So to summarize this extensive deep dive into the MGF Weekly Log, week 48 was defined by speed differences. We watched the technological, diplomatic, and financial systems, the code run, way ahead of the physical and popular realities, the hardware and the user base.
A great way to put it.
We saw peak shear in Ukraine, where that diplomatic narrative created a deeply unstable peace framework. And we watched the truly dangerous structural sign of silent calcification, trapping unreleased thermal pressure in the Middle East.
As we transition into the next period, the key isn't just to observe events, but to identify the pressure release point. The most important signal to watch for is where the heat trapped by calcification tries to escape.
Where does the system crack?
Given the continuous high shear generated by the fast AIOS and fast diplomatic layers, you should look for an unexpected rupture, a geopolitical flashpoint, an abrupt market shock, maybe a nonlinear regulatory decision, something that acts as the pressure release valve for these globally hardened membranes. The risk has been localized and trapped. It has to breach the surface somewhere.
And that leads us to the final provocative question that the log poses, which we'll pass on to you, the listener. If the global system's primary mechanism is constantly widening the speed gap between the code, the OS, and the physical world reality constraints, what nonlinear jump or unexpected collapse will occur first? Will physical reality somehow manage to catch up to the exponential demands, or will the OS break the fundamental physical constraints it was built upon? Think about which layer, the fast-moving OS or the slow-moving reality, you are betting on in your own life, your career, and your investments. That's something to mull over. We'll see you next time for the next deep dive.